Yeah, I mean, there's no denying that C.J. Stroud did not have a good postseason, but I think it is also worth stressing that he was a very different player, not just during this regular season, but since he's come into the NFL. I mean, talk about the interceptions and the turnovers, but over the course of his regular season career in the NFL, he has an interception rate of just 1.7%, which is 11th amongst quarterbacks in that time. So I think you can argue that he has proven that's not who he is on the whole. He just has to make better decisions when it counts, particularly coupled with that defense, right? Because not turning the ball over can be just enough, quite frankly. I also think, however, that it's undeniable Houston can do a better job of supporting him. Wide receivers were injured in the playoffs. There's no helping that. But this was an offensive line that they revamped last year and struggled last year. It's a run game that was 29th in DVOA last season. So as we look ahead to the draft and think about this team through the context of, like, how can we have C.J. Stroud be his best self, those are areas where this team can continue and should continue to focus the offensive line and the run game.
Yeah, Mina, when I think about the Texans in this year's draft, it feels a little bit like where I was at with the Broncos in last year's draft class. And what I mean by that is the Broncos didn't have some obvious glaring need going into the 20th pick overall last year, which they ended up using on Jahdae Barrett, the corner from University of Texas. But obviously, you're still going to make a pick, and you still have to be thinking about the future. I don't know if Nick Caserio could have made it any clearer during his press conference today that the team is going to take the best player available. The only exception would be if the best player available is at quarterback. All that being said, I think there's a chance the best player available happens to line up with what I think is a need, which is to get younger across the offensive line. You mentioned all these pieces they added into the fold this year. They're experienced players. They're also older players. A guy like Braden Smith, who turned 30 not even a month ago, and Wyatt Teller, who's now 32 years old. He just has to be ready for the eventual next wave of your offensive line. I think Max Yanachor from Arizona State would be a logical pick at number 27 for Houston, 28 for Houston, if he is there. This is a player who did not play high school football. He was a soccer player. He began his college career at East Los Angeles College. He finished up at Arizona State as a career right tackle, but just kept getting better and better by the year. Very athletic player. I think the best case scenario for him is somewhere where he can learn with a little bit of time, get some more seasoning, and the Texans do present that scenario, given that their projected offensive line, as things presently stand, I wouldn't say is set in stone, but at least in dark pencil as we stand here on April 13th right now.
Okay, number 2 pencil. Shefty?
Yeah, there's no question the Texans still could use upgrades along the offensive line. But Field, and you would know this better than anybody, I think there's going to be a run on offensive linemen starting in the middle of the draft, right around 15 or so, up until the Texans' turn. I could see a bunch of teams in that range going offensive linemen and leaving the board a little bit bare at that position by the time the Texans slot rolls around, which brings Nick Caserio into that best player available. Again, if this defense were able to add somebody like Denver's defense did last year, they would have to do it. It's not something I think they'd want to do, but if the way the board falls, it could be that these offensive linemen are flying off the board from 15 to 25 range, roughly, and it leaves Houston a little shorthanded at that spot.
Yeah. I'll be honest. The conversation around the Texans and C.J. Stroud and all of this it is pretty annoying. Because really outside of defense there has not been much of any support for C.J. Stroud and this team. They tried, with getting Diggs and trying to put together Nico and Diggs, etc. And that obviously, injuries and all of that. And I understand that C.J. Stroud did not have the best playoff run. And Mina's like, oh, he needs to make better decisions and whatnot. I think we have to draw the line in the different types of decision making. Sometimes you're making bad decisions because you're making a bad decision. It's just a straight up I'm trying to make this throw. I'm trying to do this thing and it's wrong. I'm making a misread or I'm getting fooled by the defense, whatever it may be. CJ's issue with decision making is more like he's making poor stress decisions, more panic decisions. That to me is such an easier problem to solve, honestly, in a lot of ways. So, I saw this to me started to really show its head in 2024 and I was kind of observing it and I was just like, what's happening? I remember making videos where I'm like, yeah, you won. This was a good game, blah blah blah. Blah blah. I'm like, you know, 'cause since I had high hopes for the Texans, I'm like, this isn't quite complete. This isn't quite what I want, and I'd point out, you know, an interception or a turnover or whatever. And I remember, you know, at the time Texans fans, pushed back. And now to me it's really kind of magnified and has kind of taken root. And I've defended CJ Stroud and said, you know, so much of this is O-line issues and you know, turnover and coaching and receivers and tight ends being injured, like, you know, everyone getting banged up. Even CJ being in now the lineup and whatnot. That's how you get where you are, right? There's no trust and faith. The problem is that he's still making bad decisions in those, you know, in that situation. And it's like, I don't even need him to make great decisions in those moments. I just need him to not make bad decisions. And I don't even want to call them decisions, just bad plays. You know, CJ has had a habit of making a bad play even worse. And it's just like that's all at this point. I'm just asking him to remove. When he removes that, absolutely golden. But the O-line has been absolutely horrendous, and it's not just guys, it's also coaching. And this is from last year after the Texans lost to the Bucs. I had saved this clip 'cause I loved it so much. I was thinking about this last night. I'm watching Nick Chubb in the backfield, right? And when Nick Chubb, before the injuries and all of that, when he was in Cleveland, Cleveland had a really good offensive line. What did Cleveland do as well when they had a good offensive line? Do you remember? Play action. Play action. And what else did they do? You remember? They brought an extra offensive lineman. All the time, 6 all the time. That's what you have to go to. When your run game is being stifled like that and you just show breakdowns in protection, miscommunication, you have to make defenses put another body on the field. Yeah. Look, Nick Chubb is in between the tackle runner now. He used to have the burst. I don't think it's still there for him to be able to bounce those things. But to see them consistently line up the same way, same amount of offensive linemen, you have to find these answers, because if there is no run game coupled with what you show, they got no shot. And let me hit you with this. 83% of the time that they were in shotgun, it was a pass. You guys, you know this. Like it could be first down. You get in a shotgun, what are you defensively going to do? And you guys have checks. They can automatically trigger pressures that we would naturally see on a third down, because they're going, hey, they're throwing every time they're in gun, it's a throw. Let's get to a blitz package. What makes me mad is that a lot of this stuff is philosophical. Like they have showed that some of it is the people, but some of this stuff you remedy by changing a small thing. People getting pressured. Yep. And so that's what I also want to highlight. So, it's not just bodies, it's not just CJ Stroud as Ma. Because said, you know, it's philosophically as well. And don't get me wrong, that was early in the season last year. Some of the changes were kind of done a little bit, but it's just this team has been inherently flawed offensively for really all just interconnected reasons. And I still think there's just too much on the shoulders of just the focal point of CJ. And that's what I just want to keep making sure, and I've emphasized this a handful of times in my recent Texans videos. But I just really want to emphasize that as much as I can. And again, I also want to emphasize that I think really CJ's weakness right now is just making a bad play worse, but I understand it. I understand how it's happening. I still want him to be better, cause I expect better from him, because I actually believe he's a legit quarterback, and you know, I'm going to hold him to higher expectations. But it's a collection of things, and that's why I'm interested to see, year 2 what this operation looks like. And I mean, cause this team is not going to go far if they can't get this right. And not only that, you got to show signs of being able to adapt, to evolve, to troubleshoot. And I think the Texans have been awful at that. They've been awful at troubleshooting. I looked at this before. I like Bobby Slowick. But I think with all the injuries and whatnot, he was not good at troubleshooting and he was not good at managing when players were in A&D out of the lineup. And I said, listen, he's a young coordinator. That makes sense. I understand it. And then at the same year, I pointed to Shanahan and said, Shanahan's not doing good with it at all now. You know, and that's why I said and that's what makes Andy so unbelievable. He's a master at it. You know, he's awesome at it. And it takes time. It takes being an experienced, you know, coach and coordinator to be able to to do this sort of thing. And so, you know, even with different coordinators, they've had this history of just like being unable to troubleshoot. And when you're unable to troubleshoot, like that to me, whether it's because of injuries, whether it's because of lack of production in a certain aspect, like that to me is a genuine issue in coaching. We saw this again this past year specifically with the Eagles, with the Lions. Like you can see it. You're like, oh, you have a problem that you can't solve and you have no way to lessen that problem. Alright, you don't have to perfectly solve it because at the end of the day you're going to need either elite coaching or elite players to truly potentially solve a problem. But there was no solutions. There was no movement forward for say like the Eagles or the Lions like specifically, through a specific offensive lens that I'm looking through. And the Texans have had variations of this, especially 24, 25. And so, it's just like you need to see that troubleshooting. We saw this when I can never remember his name. When they fired the coordinator for the Buffalo Bills and then that's when Brady took over. I can't think of his name right now. They could not troubleshoot. I think Brady's pretty good at troubleshooting. I don't know if he's great at elevating to the highest level or maybe not as much as I want him to be, but he's great at troubleshooting. He is good at troubleshooting. Granted you have Josh Allen, so he's your ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card, but he's great at I would say that maybe great's too strong of a word, but he's competent at troubleshooting. If you can't troubleshoot, you're running into problems. You're running into problems. And when you have a young quarterback who's in year 2 and then year 3, especially when you have a rocky year 2 where you couldn't troubleshoot and help him get settled, you then can't build off a foundation from year 2 into year 3. And then year 3, you repeat that same pattern. So, you haven't been able to really build off of and really develop a quarterback in the way that you would hope to do. And this is the problem, so why we talk about football being the ultimate team sport. It's like when you can't figure some of this out, it holds back everything. And then, if you're going to hold back the quarterback's obviously the most important person there. Now it's just a feedback loop. It's just a snake eating its own tail. And that's how you get in the situation that you're in right now with the Texans offense. And again, what irks me about it, and I wrote this and I think I either said this in a video or I said this in a comment section, which is like if their offense was just more consistent and more competent, like the Texans are missing out on the opportunity of being genuinely in Super Bowls. Like they genuinely in a position to be in multiple Super Bowls really. You absolutely could have beaten the Chiefs in 24. Absolutely. We saw what the Bills do what the Ravens what the Texans do against the Bills and Josh Allen. We've seen it. We've seen it. This past year against the Patriots, that game was a mess. Weather was crazy. I do think that they could have won that game, but that game was a mess. Though that weather was it's one of the best examples of why you should either have all dome games or no dome games, cause no dome games or with dome, you don't have that, so you get a cleaner game and it's okay. But without a dome, then you actually get the weather and the elements. You're this is cool. This is crazy, right? If you have a rooting interest and you really want to see your team win, it can be frustrating. But game was wild, it was freezing, it was wet, it was snowy. I mean, it was you hit everything. It was a little crazy. And so, I'm just like, alright, I can give the benefit of the doubt there. Both quarterbacks were kind of slipping and sliding all over the place, but if you made better decisions, you could have won that game. If CJ Stroud was a better game manager, you can win that game. But so there's a couple of teams that I see that haven't been able to put this all together quite yet. And it's just like it really kind of frustrates me because again, it's just the stakes could not be higher. Because it's genuinely like you have a path to a Super Bowl. Like you have a path to the Super Bowl. You still have to give credit to the offense. The offense was still got it done. The defense was elite and was, crushing Mahomes and all that, but Jalen Hurts and that Eagles offense still got it done. Jalen Hurts wasn't coughing the ball up 3-4 times. They took away the run game and Jalen Hurts took over and said, okay, I'll be the run game. Like those things matter. It's the difference between winning and losing. 'Cause that could have turned into essentially a version of what we saw with, the Texans in some previous playoff games. But it didn't because the offense was competent enough and was able to get it done and was able to troubleshoot and was able to be resilient. Okay, you took away Saquon, that's okay. We got other cards to play. That directly leads to a Super Bowl win. It directly leads to a Super Bowl win. And like the years of the things Texans have been lacking that if they can just put it together, you're in a position to win the Super Bowl. And so, then every day that you don't get a better every week, every game that passes, every season that passes, you're just like, what are we doing here? What are we doing here? And I just think that it ends up being a cop-out when you just kind of circle CJ Stroud and be like, CJ Stroud has regressed. This, that. And people can, and it's just like it's deeper than that. Much deeper than that. But those are just my thoughts. I'd absolutely love to hear yours. What do you guys all think about the Houston Texans? How they've come up short, what they need to do to kind of take this genuine step forward. Where do you think they go in the draft? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single comment. So, whether you agree with me or disagree with me, either way, let's get into some discussions. Let's get into some fights, but ultimately, let's just have some fun. Please do consider subscribing. We're building an amazing community here and I'd absolutely love to see you part of it. I want to build something that we all generally feel connected to. Something that we're really excited to be a part of. I think we're well on our way to doing it. Please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. It really does help the visibility and the algorithm. Thank you so much. See you next time.